Today I'm joined by Jaiook and Johnny from Rovio. This is following on from a conversation that you had on our stage 2 years ago, where you talked about the journey of Angry Birds 2. And that we're basically just seeing what's changed in the past 2 years at Rovio and what you guys have influenced in that change. Yeah. But if we start with a bit of a background context into who the pair of you are, so if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Well, thank you for having us, Paul. My name is Johnny. I've been in the industry since 2003, and since 2007 have been focusing on free-to-play games as a service. I spent about 13 years at EA in a variety of roles, starting in Stockholm, but then moving to the US and then to Melbourne, Australia, doing core games like the Battlefield franchise, but then also free-to-play games like Battlefield Heroes, and then moving from there to casual games, doing mobile, Scrabble, Tetris, ultimately running the Pogo.com live service, and then being the EP for EA's mobile racing portfolio. I went back from there to Europe to join Remedy, helped to open up Remedy's Stockholm studio, and then in late 2023, I joined Rovio, and it's been a hell of a fun ride since then.
Quite the career. So what role do you play in the studio?
I'm the general manager of the Stockholm studio, and I had a business unit for Rovio focused on action and RPG games, which also includes a second studio in Copenhagen, which is working on a very cool Sonic the Hedgehog game.
Very cool. And you?
I'm the head of operations for Rovio Stockholm, and basically I'm responsible for making sure everything runs smoothly both from an operational and a project perspective. I joined the gaming industry about 14 years ago now, 2012. And before that, I actually came from a finance background, so I'm actually an ex-accountant, which is
fun.
It was very fun.
Jook keeps us honest.
But since I mainly worked at Electronic Arts at DICE as well, working on the Battlefield and Star Wars Battlefront franchises in the online technology department. Since then, I joined Rovio, must have been a year and a half ago now, August 24-ish. And it has been a bit of a roller coaster, but I feel like we're finally getting to a point where things are running quite well, and we're quite proud of what we've managed to achieve in the last few years.
Perfect. So before we jump into Rovio itself, how do your individual backgrounds shape the way that you now run this studio?
I think from my side at least, I do come from a business background, working in sort of the banking industry and other larger sort of non-tech and non-games industries. And I've sort of had a fair amount of experience working in sort of larger corporate environments and trying to ensure that things run well from a business practicality perspective. Coming into Rovio, it has been a bit like we have a more of a startup and fun sort of mobile games industry feeling, and trying to pair that with sort of a more serious sort of business perspective of ensuring that we have performance and that we can support both the Rovio company as well as Sega. So from my side, it's sort of like trying to pair the practicality of that business side with ensuring that we maintain a culture of sort of innovation and fun that we want to in the gaming industry.
Yeah.
What Jook was just alluding to, this idea of a little bit of a startup spirit, that also resonates very well with myself. I'd call myself an entrepreneur when I reflect back on my career, starting with free-to-play games that we were starting to incubate at EA out of DICE beginning 2007. I always had a thing for difficult missions, trying out uncharted territory, or actually jumping into messy situations and trying to figure out that we can make these things better. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly part of the story here. rebuilding something that has, you know, a very sound and positive core, but needs some fixing, whether it's on the product side or the team side. And then I think the other part is just a big belief that I've formed over the years that one of the biggest assets in our industry is teams. If you're making games, if you're passionate about making games, everything starts with making a great team, and that's an art and a science.
Yeah. I mean, because the majority of your backgrounds are mostly like PC console type games in studios. Was there anything that maybe you underestimated by coming to a mobile studio and joining Rovio?
In my case, I think I overestimated things. I was expecting some things to be maybe a little bit more mature than I thought. If you think about Angry Birds 2, it's a live service that's now over 10 years old. And what I discovered, I was expecting, you know, something very settled in terms of organization, in terms of ways of working. But what I realized that the business very much felt like a 10-year-old startup. And there's lots of good and fun things about it, but I think when you think about running and managing and operating a live service at scale, there's probably some things you want to do different once you are, you know, a scaled-up business and no longer a startup.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular in that area?
Ways of working, predictability in production
Even
processes.
live operations, live service tooling, you know, these sorts of things. Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely it felt a bit like we were making decisions on the fly, very short term. You know, we'll do this feature now and this feature, and sort of jumping between, you know, feature sets or sorry, product decisions that we were making were very short term, without sort of a longer term roadmap or longer term thinking of how do we want to look in a year's time, 2 years time, 5 years time. Yeah, so I actually agree with you quite strongly there, Johnny. That
At
yeah,
the
I
time
was expecting a bit more.
Yeah,
like
at the
a
time we
settled maturity.
at the time we started, our production way of working was to plan no more than one release ahead. We knew very well what the next release would be, but we didn't know what would happen beyond. And if you think about Angry Birds and the fact that we're, you know, a big brand, actually a transmedia franchise that is doing movies, that has real world entertainment, that has merchandise. If you want to maximize the opportunity that's implied in this transmedia idea, you need an ability to plan ahead, because the partner teams that you collaborate with, they need those planning lead times. And so, yeah, now we're in a situation where we can plan ahead with a good level of confidence 12 months, and we have actually line of sight to beyond that. That's something we did not expect, I think, 18 months ago.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like when I started at least, I was expecting, I guess that we did have more of an idea of, okay, you know, in 24 we would want to do this, in 25 this, 26, but to an extent we had to kind of rebuild that from scratch. You know, obviously within us too, as well as our leadership team with our game director and our heads of craft, kind of coming up with, hey, where do we really want to focus our energies over the next few years? But yeah, no, I'm feeling pretty good actually now about the sort of where we're heading and what our roadmap looks like.
There was a real
We're kind of touching upon this already, but if you had to summarize the last 2 to 3 years since you've joined Rovio, what would that headline be?
It might be rebuilding the foundations. It might be which implies many things. It implies culture, it implies people, it implies ways of working, it implies strategy. One thing I wanted to say earlier, you know, from shifting from this very reactive way of working where you have visibility to, you know, one release, and no more than that. One thing that we had to confront as we made that change was a belief within some of our team members that working in mobile and planning ahead basically are contradictions, right? You need to be very agile and iterative and data informed. And some people felt that that's a contradiction with being strategic. And I think one big belief of us is that these things can coexist and
They're definitely not mutually exclusive. I think, I remember a long time ago somebody used to talk about how, agile, people think about agile development and they think about a certain thing and how it sort of precludes planning and precludes sort of looking at, ahead. But it just means for me that, you can react a lot quicker, we can iterate quicker, we can learn from, our mistakes or our failures and change course quickly if needed. But I think in general, you need to be able to have that plan so that, you can organize people around it. You can, set a vision, you can get your teams brought in and excited basically about what the future holds. Absolutely.
Another thing we found was when it comes to organizational structure, the idea of working in a matrix organization where you have projects or game projects, if you will, or game pods as horizontal lines that are comprised of cross-functional teams that have, a mission, a mandate, and autonomy to execute. And then in verticals, crafts. And one thing we realized, at the beginning that the delineation between craft verticals and empowered horizontal pods was not clear. We had some examples where craft leaders felt, accountable for managing into the horizontals with the best of intentions, but that created confusion.
Yeah, I think, kind of back to your original point from my side, if we can sum up for the last couple of years, I feel like we have a bit of a second wind in terms of, we have a lot of new people, we have a lot of new ways of working, we've kind of been rebuilding the foundations and figuring out these sort of challenges, these challenges that have existed for a long time from I think an expectation setting, maybe an alignment setting perspective where these conversations have never happened, where, how do we want to work? How do we want to talk to each other? How should our game work with, the expertise and the crafts? And I think we're at a stage now where we, have kind of reset somewhat and, we can take a step forward. So yeah, bit of a second wind, I think.
Yeah.
Studio.
The end of the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, Angry Birds is a IP that everybody is familiar with, so it's probably quite surprising to hear potentially how that game had been developed over the past few years and so on. But what would you say, since you've been here, what are the most meaningful changes that you've made?
I think from my side, it's, it touches back to a point you made, Johnny, about, how the importance of team and, ultimately we make games. So, we don't have capital equipment. We're not, getting ore and melting it into steel. Everything we do relies on our people and our teams. And I feel like, at least when I started, that it was an area that had maybe been underinvested in and maybe not organized in a way that was optimal, especially for a long-lived franchise, a franchise that we want to live much longer as well, or evergreen as we call it. And I think, from my side, it's been around that. Like, how have we sort of created the organizational structure, as well as sort of aligning on, what do we want from our people, and how should we work together, and what do we get excited about? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? So from my side, that's been the most interesting and fun part of working within Rovio.
I was going to say, because it sounds like there's a lot of change has been made, needed to be made, but you've got to, it's a job at the end of it. You've still got to enjoy coming to work. So, if you find that element of challenge, something that you're passionate about improving, then that's, really good, essentially. And that's what drives you to make those continuous improvements.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you want to take like the sort of the hardcore I guess, robotic view. Obviously teams who are engaged work better and perform better. But ultimately, from a more selfish and personal point of view, I also want to work in a studio where people are happy. I don't want to come into a place and it feels like a salt mine and everyone's just coming in and burning down their tickets and going home. I think for me, ensuring that we have a bright, positive culture, but one based around, working together towards our goals is quite important from my side.
I think building on Jaiook's point, having this reason to get out of bed in the morning, right? Why, where are you going and why are you doing this? We realized early on something that I think unites us is a passion for making and creating, right? That's why we're here. And I think building on what Jaiook said before, the first thing if you want to make games, the first thing you want to build is a team, but then you need some really exciting vision of a cool place you want to go, something you want to make. And this for me was a really maybe one of the coolest experiences, to realize that a 9-year-old game, or looking at a 9-year-old game as an old game, is maybe not necessarily the right way to look at it. We look at it as 9 years young or 10 years young. We realize that this is just the beginning. There is so much opportunity in the product when you look around what's happening in the industry, when you look around what's happening with brands, in social media, in pop culture, in technology, that all of a sudden you feel, oh my God, we're literally just getting started. And then crafting a vision. So we look at our product not necessarily in the way that we're turning the crank, operating an old live service. We're looking at our main game as an innovation project.
Well, you are seeing that though, aren't you, in the industry, that loads of studios are battening down the hatches and sticking to what they know, and moving a bit further away from risk and potentially creating new IP and sticking on brand essentially.
There's definitely been
a very good brand here.
Yeah, I mean, there's been definitely a big shift, I think, in terms of how people interact with video games in general. People it seems at least that players are engaging more in sort of known games, or games that are quite old, that they're familiar with, these sort of live services with a good franchise backing. Like, you're talking about your Minecrafts, your Robloxes, your Fortnites, and from our side, you have your Angry Birds, your Clash Royales, your, Royal Matches, like these games that have been around for Clash of Clans, games that have been around for quite a while, that have quite a strong following, and people tend to come back to these titles, and it has meant, combined with sort of, I think the prevalence of sort of short form video and other forms of entertainment becoming bigger and bigger and taking more of people's time, it has meant that new games have struggled a bit, and we see that in the industry right now. And it's been a fairly dark time, I would say, in the last couple of years, with a lot of
you could say that
a lot of impact in the industry. But on the flip side, it does give us a lot of opportunity with a known live service that is quite established, where we have a long-term roadmap, and we believe that we can keep entertaining our players for quite a long time.
Well, while we're talking about the game itself, Johnny, when you spoke 2 years ago at our event, you were talking about the journey of Angry Birds 2 up until that point.
Yeah.
If we're focusing on the game rather than the studio, what would you say have been the biggest implementations or changes that you've made that have had a positive influence on player retention or even employee retention? Obviously, the employees drive the game.
The first part, I guess, was just, starting to deal with our technical debt and making the game more stable, making it load faster, these kinds of very basic things. When you're in a startup mindset where you're always chasing the new growth inflection point with the next feature. What happens if you keep doing this for a while and you never pause to service your debt? You accumulate a mountain of debt. And I think that was the first realization that we had. Before we do anything else, we've got to come clean and start paying off our debt, or as we call it at this talk, being Game of Thrones Lannisters, right? So that's the first part. But that now gives you a foundation to proceed to the things that we all joined the industry for, to do more fun stuff. And this year we did, I think, two really cool things. For the first time ever, I think, since the launch of the game, we did a new biome with brand new gameplay in the form of Angry Birds Space, which we launched in October, November. That was one of our highlights. And another example is that just recently, we launched the first new bird in 4 years. I think the first new bird since 2022 with Shade. And, it's a brand new bird with a cool backstory, with brand new gameplay. So it's these kind of things that excite us.
Why do you think biomes and new birds was the avenue that you went down?
It starts with providing value in terms of good gameplay experience to the player, right? We know our players crave this and wait for this, and they've been telling us in quite vocal terms, and we heard them, and we agree with them because ultimately we're gamers too, right? So we just did what we enjoy ourselves.
Yeah. So essentially, all these points all come back to community feedback. If they're complaining about load times, as you mentioned, I think it was Jaiook that told me the difference of it was a very long load time and you brought it down by a considerable margin. Do you have the data on?
A couple of years ago, we had obviously differs by type of device
And performance itself.
But even on sort of top end devices, you're looking at 20-30 second load times
to get into the game.
Just to get into the game. And in 2026, it's not sort of the experience that I think most people want, especially when it's a mobile title that you can pick up and play whenever, waiting for the bus or whatever it is. So yeah, it was definitely, when we talk about servicing our debts, this is part of that. A lot of these sort of focus on sort of shorter term wins, shorter term roadmaps has meant that we hadn't really invested in sort of technical infrastructure and architecture, and that has been something that we've been working on. I think we're around 15 seconds now on device. So there's still always room for improvement, but at a more...
Yeah, we're not done.
We're not done yet, but definitely at a more reasonable level, let's put it that way.
100%. Is there anything else in terms of major gameplay changes that you think have been very impactful, whether it's on the studio as well?
So I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's cooking, that's not all of which we can speak about just now, but I don't know if it shows, but Jaiook and I are genuinely we're very excited for what's sort of in the pipeline. I'd say that. Another thing that happens when your technical foundations are better and you have some wins on the player experience, all of a sudden some of your performance metrics look better, and that sets you up to do more profitable performance-based user acquisition. So that's another big element of this year's business story. I think because we did a better job for the player, the business KPIs were better, and that allowed us to invest also more in player acquisition.
Yeah, I think kind of touching on that, the gameplay was great. The new gameplay that we've been working on and we are working on. But the things that actually really excited me was just the fundamentals, trying to get the game to a point where it feels great for the player. And I think it's very easy for us to kind of discount things like load times or stability or you know, UI elements, or you know, these sorts of minor areas of the game, but ultimately they give a feeling of a game that is, you know, more polished or more modern, or you know, something that you want to pick up and play. And you know, the work we've been doing around that has been something that's been I found quite exciting and inspirational. And then that has obviously led to, you know, improved KPIs, which has led to us being able to acquire more players, which has then meant that we can obviously invest more. And so it's been sort of a positive cycle for us in the last few months.
Maybe one more thing to add to this story. Once things are more stable, you get to lift up your head a little bit and, you know, start to imagine what else is possible. And one such area that we identified is, look, we've got this fantastic brand that pretty much everybody knows, but no longer everybody thinks it's cool or as relevant as it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago. And we acknowledge this, but then ask the question, does it have to be this way? Or is there something we can do about it? And we said, you know, the heck with it, let's go have some fun. And we started experimenting with social media on TikTok, for example, and it had really, really fascinating results, didn't it?
Yeah, we have our own memes now as well.
Yeah.
It's been good.
So it sounds like there's a lot of change and influence that you're trying to do from a community perspective. Listen to the players, what's going on, what are they really shouting and screaming about, fix those issues first, bring that into the game. How has the community feedback changed over the last 2 to 3 years? Are you noticing a positive influence? Of course, every community will still have those naysayers that will always want more and more and more, but are you noticing a positive impact there? And has that reflected back on the studio as well and the general mood in the office?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, we do track sentiment quite closely, and we report on it, you know, on a monthly basis. And we have definitely seen a marked improvement as we have tried to, you know, fix some of the biggest issues, you know, added new features. You know, the new bird went down extremely well with our community, which I think makes sense. It was a fun new piece of gameplay that to a community that hasn't had you know, a new character in a very long time. And yeah, from a studio perspective, absolutely. Like, you know, it's nice, right? Working on something that feels alive and that has you know, a great feature, and you know, not just turning the crank, as you say, on a live service until you know, you get everything out of it and then it sort of slowly dies. But you know, we're investing a lot into new fun things for our players, and yeah, I think the team is quite excited about what's coming up.
It's important that you two are excited, because if you two are excited, then how the hell have the people working for you are going to feel? Right? There's got to be that influence from the top down.
Yeah, we think of ourselves as entertainers or providers of entertainment, right? We're here to entertain millions of players worldwide. So if players react positively to something we're doing, it resonates and reverberates through the halls in the studio, right? Everybody, you can see the smile on the faces of people at the coffee machine. Or, you know, we have weekly review meetings where, you know, we have a big group of people, you know, sitting together and recapping the past week, what went well, what needs to be improved on. It's a real mood barometer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You touched upon earlier, while we're speaking about the teams and the people within the studio, you mentioned earlier that sometimes the craft leads were having to make decisions in other areas, which was creating confusion. If we're talking about empowering teams to still make decisions, what changes have been made there to kind of increase stability studio-wide and remove confusion?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that we have moved towards more of a you know, a fully stacked feature team sort of structure, where we have various development pods where representatives of all different crafts create sort of a team that can develop a feature from ideation all the way to delivery. And that has meant that there is more accountability for that team to do the best that they can. and be able to use the expertise from all the different crafts to at a feature level and looking at it as a product deliverable, not as a I'm going to do my slice of this thing and then I'll pass it over the fence to the next person who'll do their slice. And there's no sort of holistic view of what we're trying to create.
Do you think that's one of the reasons, if there was a lot of confusion, why the studio previously could only work on one, sprint and iteration at a time? You're saying you are now in a position where you can plan 12 months ahead. If there's less confusion, is that one of the reasons why that's allowed to happen?
It's part of it, but on that side, I think it's also ambition, right? I think there was never really an ambition to have a longer term roadmap, and reacting very quickly to what was happening in the market and what was happening with our main KPIs was more the priority for the team at the time.
But it's not necessarily because you guys have worked in studios like EA and Remedy and the games that they work on, then you're bringing in best practices from games that take 3 to 5 years to build rather than a live service practice. So
there may be
you've
something,
got a lot more forward thinking and long-term planning rather than reactive mobile market on a live service game when things change a lot faster. But you're trying to bring in best of both worlds and create a
I do
studio
think
that makes
so.
sense.
I do think there's an element to this, because one thing you have to do in AAA, when you think of, let's say, AAA launches, these are very, very involved 360-degree endeavors with, a lot of supporting teams that need to be coordinated and very, very complex undertakings. And it's only possible to pull that off if you have some degree of plan. And I think that's something, if you do AAA, it becomes second nature to you. And I think it's certainly a mindset that we brought here to the studio. Another thing I would touch on is with our pod-based organization, one thing we found is our first implementation was quite what's the word, quite quickly implemented and not well coordinated, not well aligned. We set up these feature teams and then gave them KPI goals. In the industry, it's known as OKRs, objectives and key results, and then basically crossed our fingers and hoped that the teams would come up with something great that then would ladder up to something like a cohesive player experience or product strategy. And we got the opposite. What we got is basically teams chasing these their own key results in very different ways, and basically all running off in various directions doing their own thing. And so that's another reason why we realized, having a strategy, having a vision, having a game plan to align all of these pods, onto one major direction is really, really helpful. There is this thing, I'm sure you've heard it, right? In creative industries, when you give creatives no constraints, that's the truest form of cruelty, right? Because you give them so much rope to hang themselves. I think creating some form of sandbox within which you can then be creative, I think, is the way to go.
I think there's also an element of the sense of belonging, right? So you had these development pods and everyone felt like they belonged to this pod, but not necessarily connected to the overall game team. So, Angry Birds 2 has now about 60-ish people in our development team. And, you had these people who are like, oh, these 15 people I work with, they're my team and our goals are our goals. And it doesn't actually matter what happens everywhere else. But then if you're looking at it from the game perspective, that's a nightmare, because then you have 3-4 teams that are doing their own things, completely siloed, and maybe doing things that are contradictory even and hurting the overall experience. So trying to align those teams with an overall strategy has been sort of key.
It's not the only studio, rightly or wrongly, that have operated in a silo model, though, where everybody is responsible for their their own work. I think everybody's always going to look out for number one at the end of the day, especially in the current industry climate. If they can prove that their work is doing well, then maybe their job is that a little bit more secure, so to speak.
An old executive at a place I used to work said once that a team's effectiveness is very highly correlated to how big this sense of belonging is. So if you believe that you belong to sort of a small team versus a larger team versus a company versus an industry, your effectiveness increases as your own belief of your place in that ecosystem is larger and larger. And I think that kind of speaks a little bit to that. Like if everyone is competing at, and obviously people compete, we're in competition with other companies, with other games, but if you start competing at a lower level within a game, within a craft, within a team, then you start getting real problems. So from our side, we've been trying to make sure that, everyone believes that they're part of Angry Birds 2 and not just part of their little team that's doing whatever.
Beginning with the end in mind, you're creating like a mutual shared vision.
Exactly.
That you've got to get everybody on board with, because if they're not, then it's just not going to work.
And we're all part of the success of the game, right? It doesn't matter if your team succeeds if the other teams are failing. So we need to kind of realize as a whole, like we are here to make Angry Birds 2 successful, and Rovio Stockholm as well. So.
Over the past few years, what's been the hardest decision that you've had to make?
One really hard decision came mid-2024 when we decided to pause new game development in Stockholm, in our Stockholm studio. The context here is our studio always had been a creative and innovative studio that was running a live service and incubating new games. And that certainly, that continues to be our mission. But when we looked at the work we had ahead of us in the middle of 2024, we realized we needed single-minded focus to do one thing and do that well before we could move on to other things. And one interesting exercise we did at the time was we lined up a couple of incubation project opportunities next to each other. So we had a prototyping team, and we identified a number of potential projects we could be doing, and we put them next to each other, and they all were, very interesting and fascinating. But we then compared it to the live service and doing innovation in the Angry Birds 2 live service. And that's when we realized, oh my gosh, the biggest innovation opportunity and investment opportunity is right there in front of us. It's taking Angry Birds 2 and doing it right and making it evergreen. So that's our main incubation strategy for now. But as we get more and more traction with it, and as our team matures, we might revisit that new game conversation at some point.
How long do you think the studio will need to really recalibrate the live service model before you consider reopening and making new games again?
I mean, to an extent, it's how long is a piece of string, but we have ambition.
What's the hope, at least?
I mean, in the next 12 to 24 months, I believe that we'll get to a point where we're fairly confident with the foundations and the velocity of how we're going within Angry Birds 2. What that means for the future, obviously, many things can change, especially in this industry in that time. But that's the sort of the time horizon that we're looking at.
My biggest emotion at the moment is FOMO. It's basically just fear of missing out on all the really cool things we could be doing, right? So we see like really meaningful, interesting scope for our players for, 24 months out in Angry Birds 2. But then we also see what's going on in the industry, and we are blessed basically to not only be part of Rovio, but also of Sega, which gives us access to, a treasure trove of world-class IP. And, we've got a really clever team that's maturing fast, and there is great ideas of what we could be doing coming from all over the place. So it's like, when can we start doing something more?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm the practical one that has to kind of like go, let's slow
Johnny,
down.
First things first.
The problem is I'm also excited
Yeah.
about
The accountant, the finance
doing
guy.
more. Yeah, but I also get quite excited about doing more and trying to, and sometimes even my game lead is saying it, and I joke, we can't. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're right.
That's more a capacity issue, a finance issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really something basically when your production leader, who basically should be the institutional pessimist and keep holding you back, basically starts going offense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we'll see. I think we'll get there eventually.
We're a bunch of optimists here.
Yeah. So studio's gone through a bit of a recalibration, as has large portions of the gaming industry anyway. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for Rovio over the next few years? I know we've touched upon focusing on the singular live service game, but is there anywhere else if we're thinking about the dynamics?
Yeah,
of the market itself?
it's as I mentioned just before. I think the first thing in our Angry Birds 2 evergreen strategy, there is so much untapped potential where we could take things to that we're just really buzzing with excitement. So I think that's the first area. There's a lot to do. We have this brand, and it's basically making Angry Birds 2 more than a game. Really a pop culture phenomenon by leaning into the quirky, irreverent, anarchic humor that the brand has, and then tapping into zeitgeist, what's going on in the world. So I think there's some really fun angles there. So that's the first thing. But then we have access to brands. We have fantastic, emerging creative leaders that are bursting with ideas of what other games we could do. So there's, we're building a backlog of good ideas. And then maybe a third, passion project of ours, if you will, is creating a home for our makers. So we are right now in the central business district of Stockholm in a really nice office, but we have something planned which is even cooler. It's literally next level cool. It's a place that we hope to enter at the end of this calendar year in December, and it's on the third and fourth floor of Stockholm's historic Centralbadet, which is basically a historic spa from 1866. So it's an amazing historic building off one of the main shopping streets, Drottninggatan in Stockholm, located in a little park with a pond, an oasis of tranquility, if you will, and then an Art Deco building. And in there, we're going to build the greatest studio that will host the greatest developers of the Nordics.
Fantastic. Almost getting back to Finnish culture ultimately with creating a studio next to a spa, so they've got some sauna space. That's really going back to Rovio's roots there, for sure.
This is the
end of the
way.
working day. 100%. So what do you see as Rovio's real strengths today in comparison to studios in a similar market or size to you guys?
Two things come to mind immediately. So one thing we alluded to already, it's the access to globally known brand, right? Just to mention Angry Birds and the entire Angry Birds brand universe, and then Sonic, for example. Another part is a very pragmatic culture of autonomy and empowerment. And I think for two, old battle-hardened dev bears as Jaiook and myself, who, we've worked in big organizations, we've seen politics, we've seen red tape, and, at some point, you've had your fair share. You want to recalibrate how you spend your time, and recalibrate that balance more to making and less to managing administration and stuff. And I think that balance is extremely favorable here, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of touched upon sort of Rovio's sort of more startup mentality, startup culture. And I think previously we're talking a little bit about sort of maybe some of the drawbacks when you're trying to, look at longer term roadmaps and product strategy. But, the advantage there is also that, we have a lot more room to move. We have a lot more ability to make our own decisions, shape our own destiny. So I think we've got a really good relationship with the overall Rovio as a company, as well as Sega. So I think it's been. I feel like we're in a good place where we can drive forward meaningful long-term improvements.
So true, Red. We feel very empowered by our direct owner Rovio with this pragmatic culture, but then in Sega we have an owner that takes a real long-term view to things. That's fantastic. And then also in Shuji-san, our president, a leader who is very visionary when it comes to transmedia brand building. So he keeps pushing us permanently to think bigger, and we're up for that. This sounds fun.
There's a bit of excitement, beginning with the end in mind again.
Oh yeah, oh you bet.
Yeah, so not just internally in the studio, but as the company-wide as a whole. For those that don't know, obviously Rovio has multiple offices and so on. So when we're looking ahead, how has Rovio Stockholm positioned themselves amongst the wider Rovio organization, and rather than individual products?
It's basically, our primary mission is to be the home of Angry Birds slingshot gameplay. In a way, right? So the way we think of Angry Birds 2 is we think of it as the quintessential slingshot experience for years to come, right? And that's where this evergreen idea comes in. We aspire to evolve with the times and all the new ideas and possibilities that emerge in the market. So that's the first thing. Right? If you want to do Angry Birds slingshot gameplay, this is the place to be. But then the second idea is we're also here because we believe we can create like a fantastic studio, like a fantastic place for game makers where new ideas can emerge and actually come to life. In Stockholm, within this fantastic, game making and innovation ecosystem. So that's the second part of our vision, if you will, that aspires us to get out of bed in the morning, right? Become like a sports team of game makers where, very, very cool, new experiences can emerge that we can't even imagine today.
So when we're thinking about that, creating that office culture as well, is there much collaboration with the other studios?
There is.
How, when we're thinking about hybrid working as well, what does that look like in the studio?
It's a fantastic topic. So on the collaboration side, there's a good deal of collaboration. So let's say just in our business unit, action and RPG games, obviously we have intensive partnership and collaboration with the head office in Helsinki, because there are some shared crafts and functions. For example, our core technology is there. But then also we have people on our game team in Barcelona, and that's something that we might grow in the future.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, we have another game team, a fantastic game team in Copenhagen under the leadership of Hugh Grimley, who are working on a very excited Sonic the Hedgehog game. I can't say too much about it, but you know, I'm playing early
That
builds,
much is
and
public knowledge.
yeah, that's public, and that's really cool. And what's happening there is that we've established, you know, a type of creative brain trust, where, you know, in regular intervals we bring creative leaders from both studios together to just spar with each other. And the key idea here is this is not some executive top-down big brother command and control management thing. Managers basically are almost not allowed in the room. It's just for the creatives to spar, right? And you know, test each other's ideas. And
When you say spa, are they just creating different? Is it like a game creation week where they'll just create something?
everybody's
brand new as
working
an
on their
idea,
projects.
or is it specific to the projects that they're working
It
on?
is specific, yeah. Everybody is working on their projects and on the stuff that keeps them busy with. But you know, if you're in the trenches and wrestling with your project, it can get lonely. It can get lonely, and it can get siloed. And sometimes it's just really good to, you know, change location and you know, have some social time with, you know, drinks and dinners, and then, you know, throw your ideas out and see what other people do with them. Yeah, sometimes they tear them apart, but then they or yeah, well, they tear them apart and you know, leave them as such. But sometimes they put them back together again and run with it, and something better, stronger emerges. So that's really, really cool.
Very nice.
Yeah, I think in general, you know, it's very easy to kind of get stuck in your own, you know, silo, your echo chamber, and you're talking to the same people about the same things, and just getting an outside perspective is very helpful, especially a trusted outside perspective. It gives us the ability to sort of, you know, think outside of, you know, the narrow constraints that we kind of, you know, tend to gravitate towards in our day-to-day.
So, if from an outsider's perspective, peering over the fence into what it could be like to work with Rovio Stockholm at the studio, what does the team composition look like? How many people are expected to be on each individual team? What's the office dynamic and cadence of people actually being visible in the office versus working remotely? Because
I see what you
from
mean,
this dynamic, people would be interested to know.
Yeah, so we have, you know, we have both a development and a marketing team, and overall studio is around 85 people, with roughly 60 people in pure dev, and then you know, the rest in sort of a combination of marketing and leadership positions. We have, you know, an office first culture, in the sense that, you know, we're encouraging people to be here so that we can get those serendipitous moments where we can talk to each other, collaborate together. You know, just yesterday I was seeing people in the kitchen on a whiteboard, you know, drawing out sort of ideas for the next feature and those sorts of things. At the same time, we do have the flexibility of being able to work remotely. We have a few colleagues in our team who work out of both Finland and Spain. So obviously there is always some level of hybrid sort of discussions, remote discussions going on. So in general, yeah, we're trying to encourage more and more discussions face to face, but with the realities of you know, modern day working. Yeah, everyone obviously has flexibility to be able to you know, be able to balance that with being at home and taking work remotely.
Yeah, we believe in a bias towards the office, particularly when you're doing like innovative, you know, difficult stuff. But we're pragmatists, as Jaiook said. So for me, it's often, you know, the way I think about things is, if you want to make, the real world is not black and white. Yeah.
No.
In the real world, exceptions exists, but if you want to make exceptions, you need to have a rule first.
Yeah.
And the rule is actually this bias to office that I think we're seeing in the industry general coming back more and more.
Yeah, and the amount of studios we speak to on a weekly basis, we are obviously spotting that trend as well.
Yeah.
There's very few studios that are still committing to that, like fully remote.
Yeah.
We're seeing more like go back to at least 3-4 days as a requirement, with obviously flexibility as and when as cases need to go.
If for leaders, Jaiook and myself, we're there 5 days a week, but we acknowledge that that's not practical for everybody.
It also depends on the type of work, right?
Exactly.
We are in an industry of innovation, which means that being able to just spar or talk, fluently, easily to each other is quite important. But at some point, we have people like, artists and engineers who just need the focus time to sit there and focus. And that sometimes lends itself better to remote work. But yeah, we want to, make sure that we get a good balance between the two.
100%. If we're looking forward to the next 12 to 24 months, I know we've touched on certain areas, but what would you define as success in that?
So the first part is just continuing on our journey of developing the game to this place to what it can be, right? And we see fantastic amount of potential there. Unfortunately, I can't go into great detail here what exactly it is, but if you've been paying, or if listeners have been paying attention to what's happened in the game, I think there are some indications what we might be doing more of in the future. So that's the first thing. We trust that if we keep doing this well, then financial results will follow, and that's important because we're professional game makers. We're not just indies. We're doing this for a living. We need to pay the rent, so we can keep doing this and hopefully make new games in the future.
So that aspiration of fix game one, keep reiterating, make that profitable enough so that you can revitalize creating games and new games is your ultimate goal.
Exactly, right? And
so whether
in
it's
the present market, in the
months.
present market context, that's quite a hard thing to do, right? Where I think the trend is that when you look around, lots of studios are struggling and they're actually declining. Returning to growth and showing material growth in this environment, and maybe even step changes, would be a fantastic accomplishment.
How about you, Jaiook?
Yeah, from my side, I think obviously product wins are great, and it's not like I'm discounting that or anything. But from my side, what success would really look like is more in the smaller things. So I think what I would love to see is, for me to come into the studio and see how we work day to day in all aspects of everything we do, whether that's, development, marketing, or how we talk to each other, how people feel, how the office is running, how do we work well with our, sister studios in other parts of Rovio or Sega, and just have everything at a level of, operational, excellence that, we can all be proud of. For me, I get a large amount of energy when things run really well and smoothly, and you can come in, when you go in to a company or a team and you go, oh my God, these guys really have their stuff together. And I want that to be us on all aspects of everything we do. So that's what I'm hoping for. And obviously product is part of that, but a big part of that for me is the organization of the teams.
I love what Jaiook says, because basically what you're talking about is a leading in. I talk, as a general manager, I have to talk about product and business success. Yeah, yeah. It's product and business success ultimately is what I'm held accountable to. But I 100% support what Jaiook says. It's a leading indicator, right?
But they work hand in hand.
Yes.
If you
absolutely.
fix this,
Absolutely.
these results will come out of it.
A healthy team.
Yeah.
A healthy, good team makes a good game. A good game becomes a healthy business. It's this buzz on the shop floor that you see at the coffee machine when you come in, how you greet it when you're walking through the door. But also, it's something I reflected on earlier this year. When you're in a turnaround situation at the beginning, as a leader, oftentimes you have phases where you have to be quite directive. Yeah. you're basically stepping in front of the team and you put something on a whiteboard and you say, okay, this is what we do, right? Now let's go do. A fantastic inflection moment is when members of the team come to you unprompted with something you didn't tell them to do, something they figured out by themselves, and it's smack bang on strategy. It's like, yay. Like as a leader, maybe this is one of the most rewarding moments that you can have, right? When the team like gets it, embraces it, runs with it.
How long did it take to foster that kind of environment? Because if we're going a little bit back into the earlier stages of this conversation, do you think that type of level of strategic thinking from a dev or an artist or a designer to come forward with that would have happened 2-3 years ago? Or do you think it's a lot to do with the current state of play at Rovio?
I think it would have been hard 2 to 3 years ago because I don't think that sandbox existed to the same degree, right? We spoke about this a little earlier. I think this, grassroots creativity and ownership, I believe, can only happen when, you've built a sandbox with context and some boundaries, and then, off you go. Go crazy.
I think to add to that, I would also say that there was sort of maybe a level of trust that had to be built up within the team as well. So we've grown the team quite significantly in the last 2 years. And so we have had a lot of new people, we've had a lot of changes, especially in senior leadership, changes in product strategy. And we were also, not performing so well, a couple of years ago. And now, we're in a place where new people have settled, leadership has settled, the product strategy is in place, and we're starting to turn the ship around quite well. And the change in mood, I guess, and enthusiasm from the team is palatable. When I started, we had these meetings where we talk about, business performance of the week, and everyone would be like very professional, and we'd go through the slides and talk about this and this. And now we're joking and cracking jokes about, youth forecasted we would do this, but you're always pessimistic. We're doing way better, and
so it's easier to be in that place when things are going well, and when things aren't going well, that's when it's like
it's part of it. But I think there was definitely a level of trust building that needed to happen in the team, and that it was a new team with a large amount of new people. Obviously, we have people who've been here for quite a while, but the dynamics change when you change team size, when you change team structure, and we're at a point, I think, where that has really started to settle, and people feel really part of this journey and this product.
Fantastic,
exciting for me.
So a bit of a closing statement from the pair of you would be fantastic. If someone's looking to join and apply to Rovio, or work with, collaborate with, in whatever means that is, what's a short statement that you could have on why they should consider Rovio as a leading option within this space now?
This is one of the very few times in my career where I felt like we really can own our own destiny to a significant portion, which means that we have the ability to drive for ways of working, things that we want to release, products we want to work on, experiences that we want to create, where we can do that well and be able to feed in quite significantly ourselves and drive that ourselves without any real external interference or expectations. So for me, that gives us a level of freedom, but also accountability to really.
That's the ownership, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the ownership. It really you feel connected to that success, or maybe not so much success, but it's ours to own, and I find that extremely exciting, and I'm very, very happy to be here. So I would like people to join me in that journey.
Shit, where do I sign? I agree. I think that's been a big part for myself, actually, why I came, because I feel this level of empowerment from our owners, Rovio and Sega. what I would add to Jaiook is, like, if you're a creator and you're a maker and you want to shape a pop culture phenomenon, where we have a play offense mindset, right? We want to break the mold, you know, break new frontiers. It's a fun place to be. And maybe the final thing that Jaiook also mentioned earlier, it's a really cool crew.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we have a lot of fun.
You come to the you come to the office because, you know, it's like fun, crazy people, you know, to hang out with, where ideas emerge. Like, you know, we do difficult stuff, but cool creative ideas emerge, and we make sure to have a fair amount of fun, to not forget about that, right? We're taking fun seriously.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to be so candid about the journey that Rovio's been on over the past few years, but then also create some excitement on what the future holds for the studio as well, because it sounds like you've got some amazing things planned. Obviously, you can't reveal all of them, but it's super exciting. And for anybody that's listened to this or listening to this and is interested in joining the studio, then definitely check out their website and see what open roles they have.
Yeah, come talk to us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.